that brings us to the month that was November 2005. How did you feel about this month, about Genesis, about TNA, about Christian Cage?
Well, before Christian Cage, I want to talk about the, Primetime episode of Impact, which I thought was awesome, and I kind of just wish that, every week was like that.
Yeah, so the November 3rd episode aired in primetime, still taped, but in primetime on Thursday night at, I think it was 9 p.m. And it was a 2-hour episode of Impact, the first 2-hour episode. It was episode number 70, and that's the first 2-hour episode for you trivia nerds. And it did feel like an actual, proper, fully featured 2 hours of television that they had loaded up.
It felt like a real pro wrestling show. More than most of Impact's do.
If they were to actually go 2 hours at the moment, I don't think the average episode would be as loaded as that one was.
Obviously not.
It did feel like a real, fully featured, this is what 2 hours in prime time of us could look like, and that would look pretty good.
Yeah, and, but imagine how dire some of those shows would get at this point. Or at least some of the portions of those shows would get.
Yeah, because the main event of the first Impact we're going to talk about is AMW against 3LK, and then you're like, oh.
I like that, they're like, we're on prime time. We gotta put our best foot forward. That's right, baby. Diamonds in the rough. Let's go.
Everyone loves putting diamonds in the rough out first. It really gets you going. I did like Mike today, multiple times on that episode, being like, call your friends. Get your phone out. Call your friends. Tell them that Impact is on television. Call them. Call them right now.
Please, we beg of you. Again, this is another one of those episodes where I'm watching it and I'm like, I think Impact might be the greatest of all time at putting their foot forward for a first time viewer experience when they're put in a new position. They really nail that reintroduction to the company episode. The problem is, for some reason, they can't consistently, they can obviously identify the values that the company has because they do it multiple times. And they're like, this is what's so good about the company. And then, the next week, they're like, all right, now back to the path that we've been walking, which isn't highlighting all the things that we know people love about us.
So, yeah, we've tricked people into jumping on board. Now we can go back to Jeff Jarrett bullshit.
But it's they clearly understand it. Because whenever they're, launching a show, or doing one of their, famous, restarts, or they're put in a primetime position for the first time, they know what people are after. But for some reason, they just don't stick to those things.
Yeah, because this is the third time, arguably, they've done it so far. Obviously, the FSN debut, the Spike debut, and now this primetime special, all of which are, in theory, on paper, meant to introduce TNA to a new audience, and hopefully a larger audience, though it didn't turn out to be the case with the primetime special. But they're like, okay, new people, new eyeballs, what are we, and how should we make people care about what we are? And as you said, it's always X Division front and center, Styles front and center, AMW front and center, the good wrestlers that the people like, and then over time it just slips to being well, it's Kevin Nash again, right? Okay.
I don't get it. I don't get how they can clearly understand what sets them apart and what makes them cool and unique and new, and then they just never actually stick to it.
I do have a theory that over time wrestling bookers just get bored.
Well, yeah, I think that's part of it. And then CM Punk tries to kill them.
But that also happens sometimes too. But a lot of the time you don't see the people
Allegedly.
stick to the same things that work, because I think they just get bored of their own booking. And then that's Vince is, I think, the ultimate case of a guy who was just completely bored by professional wrestling as a concept at this stage, which is the reason that he changes his mind every 2 weeks.
And also resentful of it.
But he's just not excited by it anymore. He has been living in this world, writing 4 to 10 hours of television every single week for the last 40 years of his life, and he just can't get excited by this thing anymore. And I think over time, a lot of the time, you see a lot of bookers will be they'll start veering from the path, and they'll start doing more wacky, silly stuff, just because they've gotten bored doing the straight-laced stuff. But that's all to say that's not really the case here, because they haven't been booking it long enough.
Yeah. And they have a new booker every 3 minutes too, so you shouldn't be getting bored. Maybe that's the key. You have a rotating roster of bookers that all are on a committee, but then there's one head booker, and every 6 months you swap out to the next guy.
Yeah, so you have 5 people on a committee and you change the lead every few months.
Yeah, and then that way like people don't get resentful because they're still part of the creative team, but they get like a break from having it all on them. And then in that like period where they're not in charge, that lets them refresh and think of new ideas.
Yeah, because like people say wrestling is easy, and I think that what they mean is it's usually not as hard as wrestling companies generally make it out to be.
No, I think what they mean is that I could do it and I want to do it. Let me do it.
Yeah, but it like to do it over time, to book well, and to like thoughtfully book a wrestling show long term.
Most wrestling fans could probably book a pretty solid 1 month of a wrestling show.
Yep. And then they'd be like, someone would get hurt, and then someone would get injured, and then someone would try to fight you backstage. And then like even just the random stuff of like, oh, that didn't get over and that didn't work and my angles aren't what I thought they'd be.
Well, that probably has to like weigh on you too, is like, I thought this was such a great idea and it died a death. And then it's like crisis of faith. It's like, do I know what I'm doing?
Yeah, especially if you're doing like live weekly, where like even the firmest of convictions might be rattled and shaken by something just dying a death, not getting over. Or conversely, you have to then adjust if something you didn't expect to get over randomly gets over, and then you have to see how. Yeah, as I said, how stubborn are you going to get about that happening? And are you willing to just go with the hot hand that you didn't create, as opposed to the thing that you're like stubbornly trying to justify your own existence by pushing it? It's like there is more layers to it than I think the average person actually considers, even though I think on average wrestling companies do make things more complicated than they nearly ever need to be.
I think probably part of it is that attitude of like, my idea is the right idea, and an unwillingness to like be malleable about your ideas and be like, well, my idea isn't going the way I thought it was going to go, but there's something in it that's getting a giant reaction. I should just pivot completely to that. And instead they go, no, I want to finish my idea first and then we can pivot to that. But by the time they get to that stage, the thing that was hot has already started to smolder and is now, when you go to it, people are going to go, well, that would have been cool a month ago. That would have been cool 6 months ago.
Yeah. And like to go back to this era TNA, like it's an excuse that I think will dwindle increasingly, especially as we get toward the end of the year. But like they probably don't yet still have the roster depth to do like real killer weekly TV every week. Like they don't have the fresh matches to actually do that at the moment, even for an hour show. But they're increasingly getting there with additions of like 3D, I Love Christian, of like when you look at the X Division at the moment, where you have like Strong, Aries, Shelley, Sabin, Dutt just kind of doing undercard stuff. It's like there is increasingly more and more depth there. They're getting to the point where that's not an excuse.
I think part of that would have been beneficial of like, and I get like there's probably trepidation in like at best it's trepidation, and at worst it's like weird pro wrestling attitude stuff that like you should be mixing these X Division guys more and just doing like feuds with people who aren't in the X Division, because that would increase your roster dynamic and depth like twofold immediately. Like, if you weren't afraid to just be like, for this month, Alex Shelley is going to feud with Jeff Hardy, and then we'll do a Jeff Hardy Alex Shelley match at the pay-per-view. If they weren't like afraid of that dynamic, that would instantly sort of extend their roster. But there's like, clearly they are, and they want to keep everything insular in that division. It's like if they were just like, hey, we're going to take Christopher Daniels and put him against Sabu. You know what I mean? Like, it would just immediately sort of expand that roster, but because they want to keep the X Division as its own sort of thing, that kind of, I don't know, it limits them even further.
Yeah, and I'm even like a little bit torn on that as an idea in general, just because traditionally, anytime you've seen the X Division expand beyond the X Division and interact with with other areas of the company that aren't the X Division is then usually generally treated as less than. Like it's always like, oh, it's the X Division guys coming in and losing, or they're being nerds, or someone's trying to bully them, or something like that. And it's never just like, you know, Daniels is just a guy who can wrestle AJ for the belt and also wrestle Jarrett for the belt.
Yeah, like that, because you can see how immediately that would make this show bigger. But again, you could say that about everything. It's like you just got to do things right, you know? Like, that makes this a real simple explanation. It's like, these are all great ideas and like things that would and can work, but you just have to do them with like out this weird attitude of separation. That wasn't the word I was looking for, in case you thought you were thinking otherwise. Like, if there wasn't this attitude that these things aren't on the same level, like, just make them the same level and it will work.
Yeah, it goes back to like a wrestling fan
Separation
attitude
list.
that you hear a lot about how like, oh, authority figures are bad, or brand splits are bad, or angles about people who are friends who don't want to hurt each other are bad. And like all those as like absolutionist terms, it's very stupid. Like there can be
Yeah.
a great brand split, you can do that really well. There can be a great authority figure, you can do that really well. You can do the why am I so violent to my friend angle really, really well.
Interference.
Yeah, the problem then becomes when they become tropes that are overly common or have just been badly used to the extent that they feel old and tired. And then people just keep doing them and they keep doing them badly, and then no matter what, you'll be getting money in the bank cash ins until the end of your life.
Yeah.
There are very, very few ideas on paper in wrestling that are bad, like flat out.
A lot of it just requires something that isn't prevalent in pro wrestling, and that is restraint.
Generally not people who can hold back or do things smartly.
Well, no, like, because, like, you know, a part of, I think it's something that's intrinsical in wrestling is this attitude of go, 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 you know, keep the viewers' attention. Don't make them switch channels. Just do things.
So we call it the Vince Russo mentality.
Oh my god, he won. He won in the end.
Yeah, well, like, there's not no merit to that. Like, that you do value the viewer's attention span and value their time and try to give them something interesting while they're giving you that time. But then you don't want to flip to the crazy side of that where you are desperate for that. That, like, you are desperate for their time and you are desperate for any second they can give you. And you are so afraid that they will tune out that you sabotage everything around you in order to try and keep their attention.
Yeah.